Where did you guys get started, and are you connected to? I guess you're right. I do ask two questions at a time. And I'm on medication. It should stop all that, but it doesn't. You're not connected to that sovereignty movement that those guys hold up in West Texas, and the Rangers had to come get them, are you?
No, absolutely not. We're a political organization. We're not out here playing government. And look, here's what it boils down to. I'll give you some facts and figures to show the legitimacy of what we do. In 2009, Research 2000 conducted a poll, and they asked this soft question, asked people whether or not they believed that Texas would be better off as an independent nation. And the breakdowns were 50% Republicans, you had about 45% independents, and 15% Democrats. Fast forward to 2014, where Reuters ran a similar poll, except they used a much harder question. And it was, do you think that your state should leave the Union and become independent? And what we have seen in the time from 2009 to 2014 is this. 54% of Republicans, about 50% of independents, and 35% of Democrats are ready for Texas independence.
35% of Democrats, is that because they wanted to get us out of the Union? Is that what the deal is?
Well, no, I mean, they were interviewing Texans. I mean, they did it state by state. But, the point here is that this issue of Texas independence is really a transpartisan issue. It doesn't follow the normal left-right divide. And that's because what we're finding here is it's a Texas versus the rest of the Union divide. Texas seems to have it right. And, I mean, we've got our own issues here. But the fact of the matter is when Texans look to Washington, D.C., we see a greater and greater disconnect between what's going on in D.C. and the problems that need to be solved here in Texas. And Texans are sick and tired of being governed by bureaucrats that they didn't elect, shoving policies down their throat that they don't want.
Do you see the movement growing the more you talk about it and promote it?
Well, absolutely. Since June 1st, and from June 1st to about the middle of July, we've added over 10,000 brand new supporters. We're seeing absolutely no slowdown. As a matter of fact, we're seeing growth. So, we're pushing over 200,000 now, and we're looking at probably doubling in size in the next quarter because people have had enough and they're ready for Texas independence.
Daniel Miller is the president of the Texas Nationalist movement. Where did you guys get started? How long has the organization per se been alive?
Well, we're well over a decade old at this point. But where the TNM originated was from essentially a unification of a bunch of very small independence groups that were out there, all kind of pursuing their own interests and of course, with the goal of Texas independence in mind. So we were able to bring everybody to the table, as many as we could in 2003, and sit down and hash out and say, look, this is what we have to do. This has to be a legitimate political movement. For that, we look to different political movements around the world that are fighting for self-determination, like the folks in Scotland or UKIP trying to get the UK out of the EU, the Catalonians, the Northern Italians, the Flemish secession movement. I mean, there were so many to look at, but that's where we had to be. And so what we did was we essentially took this issue from the extreme to the mainstream. The issue and the idea of Texas independence has gone from something that people talked about in back rooms or joking over barbecue to an actual mainstream political issue.
I never thought I would hear the day you would hear the Flemish independence movement on 710 KURV, but I'm with you there, brother. Well, let me be negative. I mean, seriously, this has been tried, and the Civil War was fought over it. I realize that there are some people who say, well, we did have the right to secede, meaning whatever state wanted to, and it's over, right? I mean, how do you do it? How do you lawfully secede?
Well, let me address the first part of that before we start talking about the legal aspects of it. And what you have to understand is when we woke up this morning and looked at the calendar, it didn't say 1836 or 1861. It said 2015. And what you find is that over the last 60 years, this concept of self-determination has been the global trend. You had 54 recognized countries at the end of World War II. You had 192 at the end of the 20th century. And you go back and you look just September of last year, the Scots held an independence vote. They held a referendum on leaving the UK. So this is not something that we're looking at from the lens of the 19th century. This is definitely a late 20th century, early 21st century phenomena that shows no signs of abating. So that being said, to answer your question about the legality of it, it's pretty straightforward. James Madison, who is arguably the architect of the United States Constitution, was asked about the issue of secession or states leaving the Union. And he said that the federal government has no power in that regard because it was not delegated to them by the Constitution. So therefore, the 10th Amendment to the Constitution is in play, which reserves that power to the states. So then you have to look at Texas law. What does the Texas Constitution say? We have a Constitution that was written well after the Civil War, so post-Reconstruction, accepted by the United States federal government for our reentry. And it says this: Article 1, Section 1 says that the perpetuity or continuance of the Union depends on the right of local self-government unimpaired to all the states. So essentially, Article 1, Section 1 of our Constitution declares the Union with the rest of the states DOA. But what you have to do is you have to look at Article 1, Section 2. And it is probably the most pure and beautiful expression of the right of self-determination. And it says this. It says that all political power is inherent in the people, and that they have at all times the inalienable right to alter, reform, or abolish their government in such a manner as they may think expedient, which essentially means that the only thing standing between Texas and independence are Texans.
That makes it sound so awesome.
But by the way, but I go back again. They're not going to, I mean, as a practical matter, not whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, as a practical matter, the Union, how do you get, first off, you'd have to have a majority of Texans, or I guess, or a militant minority. And by militant, I mean dedicated to the cause. And then you'd have to get the U.S. government to allow it. And back again, they fought the Civil War over it. Now, I will have to say, just so you know, it's important, I'm happy with the flowering of the idea that the federal government has too doggone much reach. They're full of themselves. They've expanded past their legal authority. I'm happy for the pushback, but I just don't see how you guys have a legal leg to stand on.
Well, I mean, I covered the legality, and it really is the constitutionality of it. And
but you have to, they're going to roll tanks on you.
Well, no, they won't. I mean, look, what we're talking about here is we're talking about the Texans, men and women, fathers, mothers, blue collar, white collar, no collar, doesn't matter, going to the polls and expressing their political will that they want to be independent. It has happened over and over again in the world throughout the last 60 years. It happened most recently in Scotland, which was part of a first world power in September. And there were no tanks, bombs, and guns. But look, if you want to get to a practical matter, the fact of the matter is when Zogby polled the military on the issue of secession, the military was split right down the middle on the issue of a state's right to secede. But even more than that, anecdotally, people say that quite often about this idea or concept that the military will invade. Well, let me go ahead and tell you that the two largest demographic groups in our organization are active duty service personnel and veterans. And so when we were at a meeting, we were doing, on this tour in Fort Worth, and we had a gentleman who was absolutely echoing the same sentiments about the tanks, and had a gentleman leaned up against a post, and he says, I don't want to interrupt. He said, but I'm going to tell you, I just retired as an officer out of the United States Army, and if an order came down, if the Texans went to the polls and voted for independence, and an order came down from Washington, D.C. to invade Texas, one of two things would happen. Number one, the Army would disregard the order, or number two, the Army would fracture from the general staff all the way to the enlisted, and they wouldn't even be able to deliver bottled water. So, this idea or concept that we're going to have some sort of, Civil War Part 2, the sequel, is just fallacy. I mean, it's just apocalyptic fantasy.
You guys going to run anyone for public office under a Texas Nationalist Party banner?
Well, we're not pursuing that, but, here's the thing to understand about the size of our organization. Were we to be a political party, we would probably quickly be the second most. And if you go to look at something just as simple as social media reach, our Facebook page alone has more likes than the Republicans, Democrats, and Libertarians here in Texas combined. So this is not a movement that is small by any means. We have been active in the legislature. Engaging our legislators, had sit-down meetings with the lieutenant governor back when Dewhurst was lieutenant governor. We've interacted with Perry when he was there. We've had some interaction with with the current governor's office. So, the fact of the matter is that as an organization goes and as a movement goes, we are committed to doing this the right way by seeking the will of the people of Texas in an election.
Is there any chance, Mr. Miller, that you will be coming down to the RGV to promote this Texas National movement? Because I would love to go to one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right now we're in the middle of this 23 city tour that we did in a month, which, you have to give some sympathy to my travel companions for having to spend a month with me and hear what I say over and over. But the fact of the matter is that the Rio Grande Valley area is a strong area of support for us. So it did not make it on the list this time just because of logistics, but there are plans to go down there when this tour wraps up.
Well, I will definitely be there. And just correct me if I'm wrong. I heard once, or I actually read that Texas is the only state that we're allowed to fly our flag at the same level of any other country, right?
That's
a lot
right.
of people don't know that.
Well, it's strangely enough, that's actually one of the myths. Any state can do that, but it's also the same. And and I mean, we like to think that because we're Texans and we're awesome, right?
That's probably what it is.
But it also goes that you hear a lot of these things where people say, well, Texas is the only state with the right to secede. It was built into the treaty and all this, and a lot of that is fallacy because ultimately any state has the right, just like Texas does, to do what Sam Houston said when he said that Texas will again lift its head and stand among the nations.
Mr. Miller, Daniel Miller, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. We appreciate it.
Not a problem at all. You guys were fantastic and gracious, and we appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much. I think we're always gracious here at 710 KURV. That's
I think
Daniel Miller.
If Texas were to do this, we'd be the only one that would have the guts to, and I think actually be successful in doing it.
It's a Texas Nationalist movement. I just thought it was, I'm not endorsing it, I just thought it was interesting. Plus, they